Hey guys, Miss Westwood and I are so excited about this new way of teaching you guys grammar. I know it's the end of the year and we are winding down, but this is a really important lesson and we're really excited for you guys to learn it in the comfort of your own homes. This frees up a lot of time for us to focus more on Romeo and Juliet for the rest of the year. So again, you guys need to be responsible for learning this PowerPoint, taking notes on it, and coming back to class on Friday, April the 12th, with all of your notes and all the practice completed so that we can talk about it and move on to our next unit. So I want you guys to know that this is our grammar unit on clauses. Clauses are really similar to phrases, but they have one really huge difference. That's what we're going to talk about right now. First of all, what is a clause? A clause is, and you should write this down in your notes, a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a predicate. Again, a predicate is just a verb. Now, this sounds very similar to the definition of a phrase. So like a phrase, a clause can also be used as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. However, even though a clause has both a subject and a verb, a phrase does not. It's missing something. I think you guys can remember that from our phrases unit recently. A phrase has either a subject or a verb, but not both. It cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. In these next two examples, I want to show you the word before and how it can both signal a phrase and a clause. So in this example, the phrase and the clause are used as an adverb to modify the verb empty. So in this sentence it says, empty the trash before dinner. Before, as you guys know, can be used as a preposition. So where you have a preposition, you also need to have an object of the preposition, which is the word dinner. Before dinner. Dinner sounds like it can have a subject, but it does not have a verb. Therefore, it's missing something and is in fact a phrase. Before dinner is actually a prepositional phrase. In the next sentence, though, we still have those same words, before and dinner, but it adds a couple things. It says, empty the trash before you eat dinner. Therefore, in this example, you is the subject of that clause and eat is the verb. It has both, before you eat dinner. It can stand alone. You eat dinner. So that is going to be a clause. Let's talk about clauses in more detail, though. There are two types of clauses. The first type of clause is called an independent or a main clause. Write down this definition. A main clause or an independent clause has a subject and a predicate, and it can stand alone as a complete sentence because it expresses a complete thought. The big takeaway here is that there's really three main components of an independent clause. The first component is that it has a subject. The second component is that it has a predicate or a verb. And the third component is that it can stand alone because it expresses a complete thought. You've got to have all three of those components in order for it to be a main clause. Subject, predicate, and can stand alone. In the examples below, I've gone ahead and underlined these independent clauses for you. The first example says, the cast bowed and the audience applauded. The first independent clause there, the subject is cast. Sorry, y'all, let me change that. The subject is cast, and the verb is bowed. So that can stand alone. The cast bowed. In the second independent clause, we've got the audience applauded. We've got a subject, which is audience, and applauded, which is our verb. The audience applauded. Again, that can stand on its own. So therefore, we have two independent or two main clauses in that sentence. The next example says the actors and actresses smiled and bowed. That sounds like it's got a subject, a predicate, and it can stand alone. In this case, we have a compound subject. We've got actors and actresses. That's what the subject is about, the actors and the actresses. I'm sorry, that's what the sentence is about, actors and actresses. What did they do? They smiled and bowed. That's our verb. So this has a subject, it has a predicate, and it can stand alone. So therefore it passes all the tests and it is in an independent or a main clause. Let's look at the last one. Lynn washed the bottles and Bill emptied the trash. We have a subject, which is Lynn. And what did she do? She washed. Lynn washed the bottles. Subject, verb, can stand alone. It's an independent clause. Next one says Bill emptied the trash. Bill, what did he do? Emptied. Got a verb. Bill emptied the trash. That can stand alone too. So those are examples of independent or main clauses. The second type of clause is called a subordinate or a dependent clause. A subordinate or dependent clause, you should write down this definition, has a subject and a predicate, but it cannot stand alone as a complete sentence because it does not express a complete thought. Okay, so it does have a subject and it does have a predicate, but it cannot stand alone as a complete sentence because it doesn't express a complete thought. Usually, there's a word before the clause that makes it not be able to stand alone. So let's look at these examples below. In these three sentences, I have underlined the independent clause again, and I've italicized the subordinate clause. Again, independent can stand alone, subordinate cannot. You need to remember that word's dependent or subordinate. Dependent basically means that it depends on something. Like you guys, you depend on your parents for money, for shelter, for whatever. These clauses depend on the independent clause in order for it to make it a grammatically correct sentence. It cannot stand alone. So this first example says, when the audience applauded, the cast bowed. Let's look at the independent clause first, since we've just learned about those. Here we have the cast bowed. Cast is our subject. What did the cast do? They bowed. So that's our verb. The cast bowed. It's got a subject, it's got a verb, and it can stand alone. So therefore it passes the test of an independent or a main clause. But we've got this clause before it, when the audience applauded. Now it has a subject. Audience is our subject. What did they do? They applauded. That's our verb. But there's this word right here, when. That makes it not be able to stand on its own, when the audience applauded. It's missing something. You can't just write that and call that a sentence. It's missing something. So therefore, it does not express a complete thought, and it's going to be a subordinate or dependent clause. Let's look at the next one. It says, the student who directed the play also took a bow. So we've got an independent clause here, where the subject is the student. And what did the student do? He took a bow. So that's got a subject and a verb, and it expresses a complete thought. The student also took a bow. We've got this little clause in between here, though. Who directed the play? That cannot stand on its own, but it has a subject, it has a verb, it just can't express a complete thought on its own, so therefore that's going to be our dependent or subordinate clause. One more example. After the trash had been emptied, Nathan rinsed the cans. We can see that Nathan is our subject in this independent clause, and what did he do? He rinsed the cans. So it's got a subject, it's got a verb, and it can express a complete thought. So therefore it's an independent clause. Nathan rinsed the cans. But again, we have this other part of the sentence right before it. After the trash had been emptied. Trash is our subject. Had been emptied is the verb. But because of this word right here, after, that cannot stand alone. After the trash had been emptied. Doesn't make sense all by itself. Therefore, that is our dependent or subordinate clause. Our big emphasis this past few months with grammar is making sure that you guys know how to apply it in your writing. So I wanted to give you a quick tip about subordinate clauses when you write. When you're writing to persuade an audience to adopt your viewpoint on a particular topic, just like you did with your research papers back in January, you can actually acknowledge that opposing point of view by presenting it in a subordinate clause rather than an independent clause. And that's a really great way to show two opposing viewpoints in one sentence. Let's look at this example. It says, although some argue that the amount of money high schools spend on athletic programs is fair, recent findings indicate that some schools spend 40% more on athletics than on other extracurricular activities. Now, I'm not going to break down the entire sentence for you, but I do want to call your attention to the subordinate clause. And this is that very first part of it. Although some argue that the amount of money high schools spend on athletic programs is fair. It has both a subject and a verb. Some, right here, is our subject, argue. What do they argue? That the amount of high schools spend on athletic programs is fair. But that can't stand alone because of this word right here, although. Therefore, it's a subordinate clause. But it's right next to the main clause, which is a completely different viewpoint, talking about recent findings show that some schools spend 40% more on athletics than other extracurricular activities. Okay, so this is a great way to tie together two opposing viewpoints in just one grammatically correct sentence. By subordinating that opposing position, you acknowledge the argument while placing it below your position. So it basically just shows that, yes, there is another opinion or another side of that viewpoint, but I don't really agree with it. So you're putting it below your viewpoint. I hope this helps you for later future essays when you might have to persuade someone, or even when you're just talking with someone else. Now that we've learned about main and independent or main clauses and subordinate clauses, practice together. So in the sentences below, I want you to underline the main clause and circle the subordinate clause. Now, we've done this before too, but a great tip is to cross out prepositional phrases first. A lot of times they just get in the way. Let's look at the first example. It says, England is the country where Mother Goose rhymes originated. Do you guys see any prepositional phrases there? I don't, so I'm not going to cross anything out. But I do see a main clause or independent clause. I've got England is the country. That can stand all on its own. It's got a subject, and it's got a verb, and it expresses a complete thought. But we still have where Mother Goose rhymes originated. Mother Goose rhymes, yes, that's a subject, and originated is a verb, but it's got that word where. So therefore, this whole thing is going to be our subordinate clause. It cannot stand on its own. Let's do number 2 together also. The people who composed the rhymes lived hundreds of years ago. First thing we're going to do is cross out prepositional phrases. I see of years ago, so I'm going to go ahead and just cross out that whole thing. We're left with the people who composed the rhymes lived hundreds. The subject of this independent clause is people, and the verb that goes with it is lived. So therefore, our main clause, I'm going to underline the whole thing, is the people lived hundreds of years ago. But we've got that little phrase or clause in between. It says, who composed the rhymes? Therefore, that can't stand on its own, and so I'm going to circle that whole thing because that is our subordinate clause. Who is the subject of that subordinate clause, and composed is the verb. But again, it can't stand alone, therefore it is dependent upon the independent clause. Try number 3 on your own real quick. It says, if a rhyme was especially funny or interesting, children would sing it. Start by crossing out the prepositional phrases. Hopefully, you notice pretty quickly that the independent clause is all together. The independent clause here would be children would sing it. Children is our subject, would sing is our verb, and it can stand all alone. Your dependent clause or subordinate clause is right here. If a rhyme is especially funny or interesting, it's got a subject, rhyme, and it's got a verb, was. But because of that word if, it can't stand on its own. Let's do number 4, and that's the last one. Some people think that this rhyme is actually a protest against taxes. The subject of our independent clause is going to be people. What do people do? They think. So our whole independent clause is going to be some people think. That's it. Some people think. Then, I forgot to cross out a prepositional phrase. Go ahead and cross out against taxes. That just gets in our way. Our dependent clause, our subordinate clause then, is going to be that this rhyme is actually a protest. Okay? This rhyme is our subject, is the verb, but it can't stand alone because of this word right there, that. That this rhyme is actually a protest against taxes. So our independent clause is some people think, and our dependent clause is that this rhyme is actually a protest against taxes. That's it for this lesson, guys. And this one was probably the easiest of all of them. We covered what a clause is, the definition of a clause. You've got to make sure you know that information. It has those 3 main components, that it has a subject, has a predicate, and it can express a complete thought. We talked about independent and dependent clauses. So you got to know the difference between those 2 things so that when we talk about next week, the noun, adjective, and adverb clauses, you're going to be able to identify them very quickly because you already know subordinate clauses. If you guys have any questions, of course you can ask Miss Westwood or myself. We are more than happy to help you. Don't forget that you need to have all of these notes and the practice completed by Friday, April the 12th. Hope you guys had fun with it. We'll talk to you soon.